This week, besides it being Parshas Tazria, it's also Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and also Shabbos Hachodesh. We take out 3 Sefer Torah. Shabbos Hachodesh, which is the last of the 4 of the Dalet Parshas, Shkolim, Zocher, Parah, now Hachodesh. What's the reason that we read Hachodesh? Baruch Hashem, this year we had Shiurim on the other 3, on Shkolim, on Zocher, on a Parah. What's the reason that we're going to read tomorrow in Shul Hachodesh? So these different reasons in the Rishonim. Rashi on the Mishnah in Megillah, which we just recently learned, the Mishnah says, it's a Dina Da'ashas, the Mishnah says to read the Dalet Parshas. So when the Mishnah says to read Parshas Hachodesh tomorrow of the Dalet Parshas, Rashi says the reason Shesham Parshas HaPesach, which means if you take a look, Parshas Hachodesh, which is in Parshas Bais, the Parsha speaks about starts Hachodesh and Rosh Chodesh, and the Parsha speaks about the halachas of Korban Pesach. So we're getting close to Pesach now. And even beside Bismana Bais and Shiur Beis HaMikdash, we have to know the halachas of the Korban Pesach. Also speaks briefly a little bit about matzah as well. But to start learning the halachas of Pesach, that's the reason why we read Hachodesh. That's Rashi. The Ran says the reason why we read the Kriya of Hachodesh, says the Ran over here in Megillah. The first psukim, Hachodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodesh. What Chodesh are we talking about? What month? The Rosh Chodesh of Nissan. Being that it's the Rosh Chodesh of Nissan, we read this parsha because now it's Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Actually, it's even more because we're going to read it on Rosh Chodesh Nissan tomorrow. The Kolbay adds a little more. Why dafka this month? Maybe we should read any Rosh Chodesh. We can find in the Torah really. The Torah, maybe when the Torah speaks about Rosh Chodesh Av, read it then. No, like it says in the Pasuk, Hachodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodesh. It's not just Rosh Chodesh, but it's the Rosh of the Chodesh. Explains the Kolbay like the Ran. That's why we read Hachodesh. So reason number 1 is to know the halachas of Pesach. Reason number 2 is because the Psukim start Rosh Chodesh, that's Rosh Chodesh Nissan. And along these lines, but a little bit different, maybe to call it a third reason why we read Hachodesh, is the Levush. The Mishnah Berurah brings it. The Levush says the reason why we read Hachodesh is the Parsha speaks about Hachodesh Lachem Rosh Chodesh of Kiddush Hachodesh. Of Kiddush Hachodesh. Rashi brings that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand exactly, and the Eibusha showed him the Levana, Kiddush Hachodesh. But Avada, by us reading the Parsha, and in particularly on Rosh Chodesh, we're not being Mekadosh the Chodesh. It's only a Takonas Chachamim. Kiddush HaChodesh is only Bebezdin. What we read the Parsha is to remember, a Zeicher, to know about the din of Kiddush HaChodesh. But the Ikka Kiddush HaChodesh is only Bebezdin. But Doima, to this concept you find in the Magen Avraham, he brings the Yereim. The Magen Avraham says that we have Rosh Chodesh benching. The Magen Avraham is the beginning of Hilchas Rosh Chodesh, the first Siman Tov Yud Zayin. So the Magen Avraham says, "V'kosev b'sefer Yereim," that we have Rosh Chodesh benching. That's not Kiddush HaChodesh. Rosh Chodesh happens anyway. So why do we have Rosh Chodesh benching? Avada, we have Bakoshes over there. But we say Rosh Chodesh Yeh B'Yom, Rosh Chodesh Nissan Yeh B'Yom HaShabbos Kodesh. Why do we say it? It's a achroza, but it's not a Kiddush HaChodesh. So we have 3 reasons over here, let's call it 2 or 3 reasons why we're going to read tomorrow Hachodesh, either for the halachas of Korban Pesach, the halachas of Pesach, or because the Psukim speak about Rosh Chodesh Nissan, and the Psukim also speak about Kiddush HaChodesh. The Yerushalmi has a question on the Seder of the Dalet Parshas. He actually brought it up last week as well, and Rashi Bais brings the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi asks, why is it that it's Parah and then Hachodesh? L'chayr should be the opposite. Hachodesh is when is Rosh Chodesh. Hachodesh is Alachem Rosh Chodeshim. was Rosh Chodesh. When was the para? When was the first para aduma in the history of Klal Yisrael? As is Mavur, the Gemara, and Rashi brings the Medrash. Speaker, not the Gemara doesn't say exactly, but Rashi brings that it was Bais Nissan. So l'chayra, the order should be the opposite. First we should have the Parshas Hachodesh, and then afterwards you should have Parshas Para. So what does the Olam say? L'chayra depends on the reason of Kriyas Hachodesh. Lafi Rashi, that Rashi says that the reason why we have a Chodesh is Mishum Pesach, the Karm Pesach. So first you have to have the Kriya of Para, which tells us how to become Tahar, and after we become Tahar, then we know. Then comes you bring the Karm Pesach. You can't bring the Karm Pesach when you're still Tameh. So there's an order. The kasha of the Yerushalmi is not shver lefi Rashi. Lefi the Ran, that the Ran says the reason why we read Chodesh is because of Rosh Chodesh. So then Avada, Frekti Yerushalmi, the order first should come Hachodesh, and then afterwards should come Para. We said already the answer of the Yerushalmi, Mishum Taras and Shal Yisrael. You have to really understand it's not so clear. So we have over here the Dalet Parshas, Shkalim, Zohar, Para, and Hachodesh. What happens after these four Parshas? We go back to the regular. The Mishnah tells us Chayzer L'Kasidron. The fifth week, B'Revi'as HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. What's next week? B'Chamishas Chayzer L'Kasidron. You go back to regular. Agav, do we go back to regular? Next week is Shabbos HaGadol, and these are Haftorah v'Arva. So what does it mean, Chayzim like a Sidron? We don't go back. You're right, sometimes it's not the next week afterwards, but what does it mean, Chayzim like a Sidron? So two things. First of all, the Haftorah of v'Arva that many of us are going to say next week is not Dina de Hashas, not brought in the Gemara. Many Haftorahs which we learned are brought in the Gemara. The Haftorah of V'Arva is not brought in the Gemara. V'Oid, some only say the Haftorah of V'Arva of Shabbos HaGadol only when Shabbos HaGadol falls out on, when Erev Pesach is Chalias b'Shabbos, like last year. We spoke about it last year. We spoke a lot about the halachas of Erev Pesach Chalias b'Shabbos, and we spoke about the Haftorah as well. Some only say the Haftorah when it's a Erev Pesach Chalias b'Shabbos. Okay, so the Mishnah says, after the 4 weeks after the Dalet Parshas, we go back like a Sidra. Frek the Pnei Yeshua, the Pnei Yeshua asks the following: why does the Mishnah have to tell us that we go back to the like a Sidron? The Chiddush is that the Dalet Parshas are not Kesidron, which means we're mafsik. We read a different mafter. We read a different Haftorah. That's the Chiddush. But once the Mishnah doesn't tell us that we're mafsik for the Dalet Parshas, of course we know that after the Dalet Parshas, you go back to the regular. What's the Chiddush? Why does the Mishnah have to tell us that after the Dalet Parshas, we go back to the regular Kriyas HaTorah? Pnei Yeshua asks this question. And he says the following. He says, one would have a Havamina that by reading HaChodesh Hazel Rosh Chodeshim inside, in the Parsha speaks about Karm Pesach, you could be Yoitza, the din of Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag, you're supposed to learn the halachas. And therefore what? Maybe not only Shabbos HaChodesh should you read this Parsha of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. Maybe the following weeks also. Maybe next week we should also read HaChodesh. Why should we read HaChodesh next week as well? Because we'll weiter be Makayim Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag. That's the Havamina. So why Taka not? Why Taka not? Why Taka don't we read next week HaChodesh also? Says the Pnei Yeshua that you're not Yoitza Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag with the Kriyas HaTorah of HaChodesh. You know when how you Yoitza, how you Makayim Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag? By sitting down and learning the halachas. the Kriyas HaTorah v'Chodesh, you're not Yotzei. You're not Yotzei the Shloshim Kaidim HaChag. That's what Pnei Yeshua says. Therefore, Taka this week, we Taka read HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodeshim. But says the Mishnah, but we're not going to read it next week. Why not? Because there's no reason to read it. You want to read it, to be Makayim Shloshim Yoim. You're not Makayim Shloshim Yoim. Even Elul Min Haga, the Lashon HaPnei Yeshua. Umin Hagad Ba'alma, to read HaChodesh, the Asmechu HaShoylim V'Darshim. It's a minute. So the Mishnah comes and tells us, this week is Taka HaChodesh, but after HaChodesh, we go back to normal. If you remember last week, we said there's a Choik Yankov that answers a Bach's Kasha. The Bach asks, these halachas shloshim yom kaidem hachag. So the Bach asks, how come we don't see that people are makayim this din of starting to learn Hilchas Pesach 30 days before? The Bach's kasha says the Choik Yankov, we are makayim. How are we makayim shloshim yom? By reading Parshas Para. We said it last week was Parshas Para. But the Choik Yankov understands that you makayim shloshim yom kaidem hachag by reading Para. And l'chayr you'd be makayim the same thing by reading HaChodesh also. A little bit not like the Pnei Yeshua. The Pnei Yeshua explains the Havman why the Mishnah has to say we don't continue after the 4 weeks and we go back to normal, because we would think maybe we should read this week HaChodesh also, not this week, the following week, the makayim shloshim yom. In the Iker Din of Shloshim Yom Kaidem HaChag, that you're supposed to learn the halachas of Pesach. And therefore, we had a half a minute, the Choik Yankov says, you makayim it by reading Para HaChodesh. The Pnei Yeshua says, you're not makayim. Let's take a step back. These are halacha, besides this halacha of Shloshim Yom Kaidem HaChag, there's also a halacha that you're supposed to learn Hilchas Shabbos b'Shabbatay. The Gemara at the end of Megillah, Mamash at the end, Be'ez Hashem, we're going to make us see him. Sorry that we postponed it from Sunday. Be'ez Hashem, Behemshach, thank you for those that confirmed. But he said, Be'revem Hadras Melech. So Be'ez Hashem will find a future date. The end of the Masechta, the Gemara says he's supposed to learn the Hilchas Chag b'Chag on Pesach. There's a Medrash, a Yalkut, that says that you're supposed to learn, Moshe Rabbeinu taught Klal Yisrael Hilchas Shabbos on Shabbos. You're supposed to learn Hilchas Shabbos on Shabbos. So Reb Tzadok HaKohen is mesupik when you have Shabbos that's during the Shloshim Yom Kaidem HaChag, which one is adif, which one is better to do? This Shabbos, you have an extra hour to learn. You could learn either Hilchas Shabbos or you could learn Hilchas Pesach. Which one should you learn? So it's a nice shaila. There's a din of learning Hilchas Shabbos. There's a din of learning Hilchas Pesach Shloshim Yom. So which one comes first? Which what we saw now from the Choik Yankov, the Pnei Yeshua, that you're makayim with the Kri, you're not makayim, which seems that you would learn Shabbos Hilchas Pesach. Reb Tzadok HaKohen brings a raya from this that it's mavur, that Moshe Rabbeinu was oimid bePesach Rishon and teaching the halachas of Pesach Sheni. That year, Pesach Rishon, the first year was Erev Pesach, Shachalias b'Shabbos. So even though it was Shabbos, Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching Klal Yisrael not Hilchas Shabbos, but the halachas of Pesach Sheni. So Mamela, you see that if you have the din of Shloshim Yom Kaidem HaChag and you have the din of learning Hilchas Shabbos on Shabbos, you're supposed to learn Hilchas Yom Tov, the upcoming Yom Tov, rather than Hilchas Shabbos.
He was teaching this on Erev Pesach or he was teaching this on Pesach? Because then he would have been teaching it after Shabbos if he was teaching it on Pesach.
No, forget it. I think he was teaching it on Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, which was Shabbos, and on Yud Daled he was teaching was 30 days to Yud Daled Iyar. Shloshim Yom Kaidem HaChag of Pesach Sheni. Atkan, the part one of the Shiur. It's not mamash exactly 45 in the middle. This is Lagabi the Kriya of Parshas Hachodesh, the third Sefer Torah. This Shabbos, as we mentioned, is also Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, which the Gemara says, the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Pei Zayin, that is, so to speak, a lot of things special about Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Even not Shabbos, but just Rosh Chodesh Nissan. It happens to be at Shabbos with HaChodesh. But the Gemara says, the Gemara in Shabbos, Tana, a Braisa, Oisa Yom of Rosh Chodesh, Notal Eser Ataras. 10 things happened, 10 special things, Ataras, crowns, 10 chashuva things happened on Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Number 1, says the Gemara, Rishon L'maisa Bereishis. That year, Rosh Chodesh Nissan was on a Sunday. And being that it was on a Sunday, what happened Sunday? Brias Ha'olam happened on Sunday. Rishon L'Nesiyim. Up until tomorrow is the Shivas Yimei HaMeluyim. Some don't say Tachna, some do say Tachna, but it was the Shivas Yimei HaMeluyim. Shabbos starts the Nesiyim. There's a minute to read, he's the Kriya of the Nesiyim. Shabbos L'Nesiyim. The Nesiyim started now, Rosh Chodesh, tomorrow, each Nasi brought their carbon for the next 12 days. Rishon LeKahuna, the concept of Kahuna started Rosh Chodesh. Up until Rosh Chodesh Nissan, there wasn't a concept of Kahuna. It was the Bechorim that did the Ma'avoda. Rosh Chodesh Nissan, Aaron HaKohen was appointed, Aaron Uvanov, and the concept of Kahuna started.
I just want to say, the concept of Kahuna was an old concept. So,
Shem, you're right. I'm just saying over Gemara. I'm saying a Gemara. Rishon la'avoda, the avoda, Rishon la'avoda, which means, like Rashi explains, that we brought the carbon to Midim. Avoda, the avoda in the Mishkan started. We're going to try to go through a few of them as much as the time allows. We're going to go through to explain a little bit, and hopefully it'll clarify the different questions. But the while I'm just saying, Pashat the words of the Gemara. Rishon liyuridas ha'esh, fire came down min hashamayim. Rishon l'achilas kachem, to eating kachem within the machitzas, because it was kachem before also. Rishon lishka and shchina, the shchina came down. V'shachamti b'seicha, the pasuk says it was the shchina came down. Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Rishon levarach es Yisrael. The first time there was Birchas Kohanim, the first time of Birchas Kohanim was Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Rishon le'iser abamois. Now that before the Mishkan, so anybody you made a mizbeach abama, you're able to bring a carbon. Now is Rishon le'iser abamois, and Rishon lechadashim. The first of the Rosh Chodesh is the first of the 12 months. So that's the 10 chashuva things that happened on Rosh Chodesh Nissan. Tosafos actually asks, wait a second, we left out something very important. You know what else happened on Rosh Chodesh Nissan? Hakamas HaMishkan. The Mishkan was put up Rosh Chodesh Nissan. So one teretz Tosafos says that it was really put up before also. The past 7 days, Shivas Yimei HaMeluyim, Moshe Rabbeinu was putting it up, putting it down. That's one teretz. But Tosafos' second teretz, because seemingly that really is not called that it was put up. The Torah says hukam after the 7 days. That wasn't really considered being put up. Tosafos says the second teretz, you're absolutely right. That one of the things that happened on Rosh Chodesh is that the Mishkan was put up. However, the Gemara is saying, what else happened on Rosh Chodesh Nissan the day that the Mishkan was put up? I have another 10 things. So yes, there was 11 things, but the Gemara is saying besides that Kamas HaMishkan, I have another 10 chashuva things. Let's begin with the first in the list of the Gemara. The Gemara says Rishon lebrias ha'olam, which means that day Rosh Chodesh Nissan, which was a Sunday, was a day of brias ha'olam. How does this come into the list? I went through the list. Everything else has to do with Akamas HaMishkan. at that time. With the Chashivas, Parshas Kahanim happened then, Ashras, Ashchina, the Eish. How does Brias Ha'olam come into this list? Says that period. He doesn't ask this exact kasha, but his concept answers it very clearly. He says, he's the Mechaber of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, put out a sefer called Apirian Al HaTorah. On Parshas Shmini, he says the following, that when the Rabbeinu Shalom made the world, the Eibishter made a world, and he wanted to Kavayachal live in this world. He wanted to have a Dira B'Tachtoinim. And he did. Actually, like the Pasuk says, Vayelach Bagad, the Eibishter was in this world. The Eibishter was found in this world. Adam HaRishon was Chayta, the Shechina went up one Rakia. Then came the Chet of Cain, went up another Rakia, Doir Enosh, another Rakia, Doir Amabel, another Rakia, the Doir Afloga, Stoim, Mitzrayim. After these 7, the Shechina went up, all Zion Rakiyos. Then Amdud Tzadikim, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kahas, Amram, Moshe. It came down. And then with the Mishkan, there was Ashras HaShechina, which means it's true that the first day, the first of the 10 on the list is Brias Ha'olam. How does it come in? Because the whole day of Rosh Chodesh, which there was Ashras HaShechina, one on the list of the 10, that there was Ashras HaShechina, that's very connected to the Brias Ha'olam. The whole reason of Brias Ha'olam was to have Ashras HaShechina in this world. And we lost it, and we got it back with Akamas HaMishkan, which actually happened on Rosh Chodesh Nissan. It's almost a Mefurish Medrash. The Medrash Rabbi in Parshas Bereshis, the Medrash begins, Amar Reb Shmuel Bar Ami, Mitchilas Briyasei Shel Olam, when the Eibishter created the world, Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu, La'asei Shutvis B'Tachtoinim. The Eibishter wanted to be part of this world. I'm just going to bring out one point, and then the Medrash says, Eimesai Parah Lahen, that there was taka, that the Eibishter came to live in this world. Eimesai Parah Makadosh Baruch Hu La'alam B'Akamas HaMishkan. Like it says, with the Mishkan Rishon, L'Briyasei Shel Olam. So the Medrash clearly connects the day of Akamas HaMishkan to the day of Brias Ha'olam. And actually, right afterwards, the Medrash brings this, that the Gemara says Tana. It's a Bais. It's also a Medrash from the Tanoim. Tani. Eser Ataras Natal Oisei Ayoim. So it's a Medrash also on Parshas Bereshis. Clear connection. The next on the list, or what's the next? But another of the 10 on the list is the Rishon LeNesiim. The Nesiim started bringing the Karbonos for the next 12 days, starting tomorrow, Rosh Chodesh. The Bais Yosef brings a Masechtas Sofrim, and the Bais Yosef understands the Masechtas Sofrim. Hachi Isa b'Perakama the Masechtas Sofrim, and then the Bais Yosef says, V'nira, the Hachi Perusha explains the Masechtas Sofrim. Ma'achar de be'echad hukam ha'mishkan. Rosh Chodesh Nissan was hukam ha'mishkan. Like Tosfos asks, that should be on the list. It's part of it. Zakti Bais Yosef, ubiyud beis yomim she'achrav. The 12 days afterwards was the Nesiim, which means not starting Rosh Chodesh, but starting the next day, Beis Nisan. I'm not learning the Bais Yosef like that. The Bach does. The Bach does. Gama Shapirusha Bais Yosef in the Masechtas Sofrim that Be'echad Hukam HaMishkan and the Nesiim started first Beis. If they started Beis, when did they end? Yud Gimel. They started a day later. Zok the Bach, I don't know where the Bais Yosef got it. He learns like that in the Masechtas Sofrim, okay. But why would he learn like that at the Masechtas Sofrim neged our Gemara? The Gemara in Shabbos says that Rosh Chodesh Nissan, one of the Ataris is that the Nesiim, which means the Nesiim started Rosh Chodesh. Before trying to answer, there's a very mechudesh to get Even Ezra in Parshas Hachodesh. The Even Ezra, you can look, it's quite a few lines, but the Even Ezra says that the Shivas Yemei HaMeluyim actually started Rosh Chodesh. Clearly not like the Gemara. Maybe as other Medrashim, but the Shivas Yemei HaMeluyim started Rosh Chodesh. And when did the Nesiim start? Ches. He says clearly, V'hinei nishlema Chanukas HaMizbeach. When did it end? Our cheshbon, it ended Yud Bais, after the Nesiim. He says, Nishlema Chanukas HaMizbeach achar tisha asar yoim l'chodesh harishon, which means the first 7 days of Nisan was the Shivas Yemei HaMeluyim, then went 12 days, which means only 19 days into Nisan. But let's try to go back and maybe be miyashiv. The kasha of the Gemara says that it's Rishon l'Nesiim, and the Bais Yosef learns in the Masechta Seifrim that it really started a day later. Says the Beis Sha'arim, a Gavaldige Chiddush, he answers this kasha and he says, Rishon l'Nesiim doesn't mean that they were actually started being makriv on Rosh Chodesh. The Nesiim brought the karbanos to the Beis Hamikdash Rosh Chodesh. We start reading the Nesiim, the Minig, we start reading it already tomorrow. But he says no. Lefiyat Beis Yosef says clearly in the Masechta Seifrim that Krava started the next day. They started bringing to the Beis Hamikdash Rosh Chodesh. When did they start reading it? They only started, when they start being makriv, the karbanos, only Bais. So Mela, the Gemara Taka Rishon l'Nesiim is Medayik. The Russian Gemara says Rishon l'Nesiim. L'Nesiim, that the Nesiim, not l'Hakrava. The Hakrava started Bais. Also Rashi says in the Rishon l'Chanukas HaBais. Meaning to say is they brought the karbanos to the Mishkan, not that he was a Hakrava. So Mela, it's Miyushev. Big Chiddush. The Hakrava only started Bais. Okay, we'll conclude. One thing I'm going to leave out, which is a whole chunk about Rishon LaAvoda, which means that Avodah started Rosh Chodesh. The question is, it started Rosh Chodesh, they were bringing already karbanos before that. The Sasemis asked the kasha, these different terutzim. But seemingly, the Avodah B'Poyel only started Rosh Chodesh. Either because karbanos tzibur, or it wasn't a real Avodah because there was no big day kahuna, it was mutter b'bama, a lot of different terutzim. But just to conclude with one last of the 10, we didn't go through all of them, is Birchas Kahanim. Birchas Kahanim, it's mefurish in the pasuk, Vayisa Aaron es yadav, is Birchas Kahanim. It's very interesting that the Chassam Sofer is miyashav astira. He's miyashav astira of the Sefer Hasidim in the brachas that Moshe Rabbeinu gave. And basically he says that the first bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, Vihi Noyam, which is brought in Tehillim, was a bracha before Rosh Chodesh. That was the first bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu gave. But the second bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu gave was Birchas Kahanim. In other words, the first Birchas Kahanim, which of course the Torah says was like the Aaron HaKoyim, the Chassam Sofer understands that Moshe Rabbeinu also gave the Birchas Kahanim. But with this, there's a gewaldige explanation for a Moshe Halberstam in the Minig. Chanukah, we also read the Nesiim. Every day we read the Nesiim. The first day we read the first day. The eighth day, and we go till the end. Where do we start from? Chanukah. Anybody knows where we start from? What'd say? Vahik b'yoyim kalois Moshe. These are machlokes Machaber Ramah. The Machaber says we start from Birchas Kahanim, and the reason for that is because the Nes happened al Yidei Kohanim. The Ramah says that we start from Vahi b'yoyim kalois. V'chein anu noyegim, says the Ramah. Starting tomorrow, there's a minig. Either you read it from a Sefer Torah, or you say it the Nesiyim. Where do you start from? It's not Mavur where you start from. So Rav Moshe Halberstam says, explains the minig to start from Berchas Kahanim. He says, why would you start from Berchas Kahanim? Bishlei Mechanika, you start from Berchas Kahanim because the Nes happened that day Berchas Kahanim. Why would you start now from Berchas Kahanim? So he says the reason to start from Parshas Hachodesh because one of the things that happened in Rosh Chodesh Nissan was Parshas Hachodesh. So mainly you start. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a good Chodesh.